The birthday cake sat untouched on the dining table, 35 candles slowly dripping wax onto the buttercream frosting. Upstairs, hushed, urgent, and unmistakable voices and laughter echoed. My heart pounded in rhythm with the faint music still playing. Downstairs, as I gripped the banister and climbed each step, the bathroom door wasn't fully closed. A sliver of light spilled onto the hallway carpet. I stood there, frozen, listening to my husband Daniel's familiar laugh mingling with another voice. My cousin Vanessa. My birthday present, delivered by the two people I trusted most. I pushed the door open, and time seemed to stop as three truths collided in that moment. The look of shock on their faces. The painful clarity of understanding what had been happening behind my back for months, and the cold realization that sometimes, the people closest to you are the ones who hurt you the most. But what they didn't know, what nobody knew, was that this moment wouldn't break me. It would transform me. The party had been my idea. 35 felt like a milestone worth celebrating, and I wanted everyone I cared about in one room. Daniel had been surprisingly enthusiastic, offering to handle the guest list himself. "You deserve the best, Alina," he'd said, kissing my forehead. "Let me take care of everything." I should have noticed the signs earlier. The late nights at the office, the password suddenly changed on his phone, the way he angled his screen away when I entered the room. But love is a powerful filter, turning red flags into rose-colored memories. My cousin Vanessa had arrived early to help set up. We'd grown up like sisters, sharing everything from clothes to secrets. When my parents died in an accident 5 years ago, she was the one who stayed with me for weeks, making sure I ate, helping me sort through their belongings. "This place looks amazing," she'd said, arranging flowers in the centerpiece. Daniel really went all out. I noticed how she didn't quite meet my eyes when she said his name, but at the time, I attributed it to her concentrating on the task. The party was in full swing by 8 p.m. Friends from work, neighbors, and family members filled the room. Everyone seemed to be having a wonderful time, everyone except Daniel, who kept checking his watch and disappearing for stretches of time. "Just making sure everything's perfect," he'd say when I found him in the kitchen mixing another batch of cocktails. Then I noticed Vanessa was missing, too. My friend Melissa grabbed my arm. "Alina, you have to try these appetizers before they're gone." But I was already scanning the room, counting heads, feeling the first tremor of suspicion ripple through me. "Have you seen Daniel?" I asked. "I think he went upstairs," someone called out. "Bathroom maybe." I nodded, excusing myself from the circle of conversation. The music faded as I climbed the stairs, my heels silent against the carpeted steps. That's when I heard it: laughter, whispers, the unmistakable sound of intimacy coming from behind the bathroom door. My hand trembled as I pushed it open. Daniel had Vanessa pressed against the sink, his hands tangled in her hair. "My birthday present, indeed," I said. He jumped back, fumbling with his shirt buttons. "This isn't what it looks like." "That's interesting," I finished for him, my voice surprisingly steady, "because it looks exactly like my husband and my cousin betraying me on my birthday." Vanessa couldn't even look at me. "Alina, please, .. I held up my hand. "Don't, just don't." The silence stretched between us like a living thing. Downstairs, someone put on another song, and laughter floated up the stairs. My life was continuing to unravel in slow motion. "How long has this been going on?" I asked. Daniel looked at the floor. "Alina, let's talk about this later." "How long?" Vanessa finally met my eyes. 6 months. 6 months. Half a year of lies. Of family dinners where they'd sat across from each other, passing the salt with secret smiles. Of late-night phone calls I'd believed were work-related. Of Daniel comforting me when I'd confided that I was worried about Vanessa, who seemed distant. Lately, I turned and walked away, down the stairs, past my concerned friends, and out the front door into the cool night air. Someone called my name, but I kept walking. My phone buzzed in my pocket, probably Daniel, preparing his excuses, his apologies, his promises to change. I sat on a park bench 3 blocks from my house and watched the stars blink overhead, wondering how something so vast could witness something so small and painful and do nothing. The universe continued on, indifferent to my collapsing world. That's when I made my decision. I wouldn't scream or cry or beg him to choose me. I wouldn't give either of them the satisfaction of seeing me broken. Instead, I would take back what they had stolen from me: my dignity, my trust, my sense of control. I would make them remember this betrayal for the rest of their lives. The house was empty when I returned near midnight. The party had dispersed, leaving behind half-eaten cake, empty wine glasses, and a mess of confetti on the floor. Daniel wasn't home. Neither was his suitcase or his favorite leather jacket. I sat in the kitchen, surrounded by the debris of my birthday celebration, and began to plan. My phone lit up with a text from Melissa. "Are you okay? What happened? Call me." I ignored it, along with the 12 missed calls from Daniel and the tearful voicemail from Vanessa. Instead, I opened my laptop and began a careful inventory of my life with Daniel. Our joint bank accounts, the deed to our house, the investment portfolio we'd built together, the vacation property in Maine that had belonged to my parents, and the life insurance policy with Daniel listed as the beneficiary. By sunrise, I had a complete picture of our intertwined lives and what it would take to disentangle them. I also had something else, leverage. Because while Daniel had been careful to hide his affair, he hadn't been nearly as cautious with our finances. The doorbell rang at 7:30. I hadn't slept, but I felt sharp, focused, alive with purpose. It was Melissa, holding coffee and wearing yesterday's clothes. "I've been worried sick," she said, pushing past me. "You weren't answering your phone, and after what happened at the party, ... double quotes, you knew." I asked quietly. She set the coffee down and turned to face me. "No, God, no. I just saw you run out, and then Daniel left right after you, and people started whispering." She trailed off. "What exactly did happen?" I told her everything. "The bathroom, Vanessa, 6 months of lies, that bastard," she whispered. "And your own cousin Alina. I'm so sorry." "I don't need sorry," I said. "I need help." Melissa straightened up. "Anything. Name it. I need to access Daniel's computer, the one in his home office. He always keeps it locked, and I need to know what's on it." She raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Because Daniel's been moving money around. Small amounts at first, then larger sums over the past few months. Money from our joint accounts. And I need to know where it's going." Melissa's expression changed from concern to determination. "Lucky for you, I dated an IT security specialist for 2 years. I might have picked up a few tricks." By noon, we had access to Daniel's computer. By 1 o'clock, I discovered that my husband had been systematically draining our accounts to fund a new life, a life that included Vanessa but not me. There were emails about a property in Costa Rica, flight confirmations, and a new bank account I knew nothing about. "He was planning to leave you," Melissa said softly. "They both were." I nodded, feeling strangely calm. "Yes, but not before my birthday, apparently. He wanted one last happy celebration before dropping the bomb." "What are you going to do?" I closed the laptop. "First, I'm going to secure what's mine. Then, I'm going to let them think they've won." I looked at Melissa, a plan already forming. "And then, I'm going to teach them both what it feels like to be betrayed." Daniel returned the next day, eyes red-rimmed, apologies ready. "It was a mistake," he said, standing awkwardly in our living room. "A terrible, unforgivable mistake. But I want to fix this, Alina. I love you. I've ended things with Vanessa completely." I sat on the couch, wearing the same clothes I'd had on at the party, letting him see what he'd done to me. "You've been moving money," I said quietly. "Planning your escape." His face paled. "That's not ... I can explain." "Can you explain the house in Costa Rica? The new bank account? The airline tickets?" Daniel sank into the chair across from me. "How did you find out? Does it matter?" I wiped away a tear that wasn't entirely fake. "Were you ever going to tell me? Or just disappear one day?" "It started as a backup plan," he said, his voice hollow. "When things between us were rough, last year, but then Vanessa and I, it got complicated." "Complicated?" I repeated. "Is that what you call sleeping with my cousin while emptying our bank accounts?" He leaned forward. "Alina, please. I made a horrible mistake, but we can work through this. I'll put the money back. I'll cut Vanessa off completely. I'll do whatever it takes." I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time since discovering his betrayal. Daniel was handsome in a conventional way, tall, with dark hair going silver at the temples, and laugh lines around his eyes. We'd met at a friend's wedding 10 years ago, and I'd fallen for his quiet confidence, his ambition, his apparent stability. Now, I saw something else, fear. Not of losing me, but of losing what I represented: financial security, social respectability, the comfortable life we'd built together. "I need time," I said finally. "I can't just forgive and forget." Relief washed over his face. He thought he had a chance. "Of course. Whatever you need. Should I stay somewhere else for a while? I shook my head. No, stay. But in the guest room, and I want access to all the accounts again. Complete transparency. Absolutely, he agreed, quickly, too quickly. I'll transfer everything back tomorrow. I nodded, knowing he wouldn't. The money had already been moved again, this time by me, into accounts he couldn't touch. But he didn't need to know that yet. What about Vanessa? I asked. Daniel looked away. It's over. I told her yesterday. She's taking it hard. I bet she was. My cousin had always wanted what I had, from the time we were children sharing toys to now, apparently, sharing my husband. But unlike the dolls and dresses of our youth, this was one thing I wouldn't let her keep. I need to talk to her. I said alone. Daniel nodded reluctantly. I understand. No, I said, standing up. You really don't. I met Vanessa at a coffee shop downtown, far from our usual haunts. She was already there when I arrived, hunched over a mug, eyes swollen from crying. Alina, she whispered as I sat down. I don't even know what to say. Then don't, I replied. Just listen. She nodded, tears welling up again. 6 months ago, you made a choice, I said evenly. You chose to betray me with Daniel. You chose to lie to my face at family gatherings, to smile and hug me, knowing what you were doing behind my back. You chose to help him plan a new life that didn't include me. It wasn't like that, she protested weakly. We never meant to hurt you. It just happened. Things like this don't just happen, Vanessa. There are a series of choices. Choices you both made, over and over again. She stared into her coffee. He ended it yesterday. Said he wanted to try to fix things with you. And how did that make you feel? She looked up, surprised by the question. Terrible. Used like I was just ... disposable. I nodded. Now you know how I felt, finding you two together. Except worse, because I trusted you both completely. What can I do? She asked, her voice small. How can I ever make this right? You can't, I said simply. But there's something you should know. Daniel wasn't just cheating with you. There were others. Her head snapped up. What? No, he wouldn't. There's a woman named Cynthia at his office. They've been involved for almost a year. And before her, there was someone named Rebecca. I found the messages. This was a lie, but a calculated one. I'd seen how Daniel looked at other women, had suspected other indiscretions, but never had proof. I didn't need proof. I just needed to plant the seed of doubt. He told me I was special, Vanessa whispered. That what we had was different. I'm sure he told them the same thing. I said gently. That's what men like Daniel do. They make you feel chosen while they're really just collecting options. Tears streamed down her face. I've ruined everything. Our friendship. Your marriage. All for someone who was lying to me, too. I reached across the table and took her hand. This part wasn't in my plan, but seeing her pain, real pain, not just guilt, touched something in me. For a moment, I remembered the cousin who had held me through the night after my parents' funeral. We can't go back, I said. But maybe someday, we can go forward. Not as the same people we were, but as whoever we become after this. She squeezed my hand. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I'm not offering forgiveness, I clarified. I'm offering honesty. Daniel was using both of us. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Vanessa wiped her eyes. What do you mean? I mean, Daniel thinks he can manipulate us both, play us against each other, keep all his options open. He's counting on me being too hurt to talk to you, and you being too ashamed to talk to me. But here we are, talking. Something changed in her expression. The devastation gave way to anger. Just a flicker, but it was there. What are you suggesting? I leaned in. I'm suggesting we compare notes. I'm suggesting we stop being his victims and start being each other's allies. She hesitated, only briefly, before nodding. I'll tell you everything. And she did. She told me about the Costa Rica Plaza, small villa near the beach, purchased in cash through a shell company. She told me about the safe in his office at work, where he kept emergency cash and a second passport. She told me about his friend, Marshall, who had helped him set up the offshore account. By the time we finished our coffee, I had more information than I'd ever expected, and something else, too, an unexpected ally in the last person I would have imagined. As we left the cafe, Vanessa stopped me. Alina, there's one more thing. You should know. Daniel, he was planning to file for divorce next month. He already has the papers drawn up. I smiled. I know, but his plans have changed. He just doesn't realize it yet. The following weeks unfolded according to my design. To Daniel, I presented the picture of a wounded wife willing to try again. I went to the marriage counseling sessions he suggested. I nodded at his tearful confessions and promises to change. I even agreed when he proposed a fresh start vacation, just the two of us, at our cabin in Maine. "It'll be good for us," he said over dinner one night. "Away from everything, just focusing on rebuilding what we had." I smiled and reached for his hand. That sounds perfect. Behind the scenes, a different story was taking shape. With Melissa's help, I had documented every financial irregularity in Daniel's business dealings, including several that crossed ethical and legal lines. My brother-in-law, Thomas, a divorce attorney I'd sworn to secrecy, had drawn up papers that would protect my assets when the time came. And then there was Vanessa. True to her word, she had become an invaluable source of information. Daniel had continued to contact her, believing I knew nothing about their ongoing communication. "He wants to meet tomorrow," she told me over the phone. "Says he needs to talk about us. About the future." "Perfect," I replied. "Tell him yes, but record everything." Meanwhile, I cultivated new relationships. I reconnected with old friends. Daniel had suddenly pushed out of our lives. I joined a support group for people dealing with betrayal trauma, where I met Sophia, a private investigator whose husband had left her for his secretary. "The thing about men like them," Sophia told me over lunch, "is they think they're so clever, but they follow predictable patterns, and that makes them vulnerable." She offered her professional services at a reduced rate. "Consider it solidarity among the wronged wives club," she said with a wink. Within 2 weeks, Sophia had compiled a comprehensive dossier on Daniel's activities, his regular meetings with a high-end real estate agent specializing in international properties, his lunches with a young paralegal from his firm's divorce department, his visits to a jewelry store where he'd purchased an expensive bracelet that hadn't made its way to my jewelry box. "He's keeping his options open," Sophia observed. "Vanessa is still in the picture, but he's hedging his bets." I nodded, unsurprised, and the money. Moving again. Smaller amounts, different accounts. "He's being more careful since you confronted him, but not careful enough, because Daniel didn't know about the silent partner I'd acquired in his firm. His colleague, Richard, who had nursed a grudge against Daniel for years after being sidelined for a promotion they'd both wanted. "He's been cooking the books on the Westmore account," Richard told me during a clandestine meeting in a downtown parking garage. Nothing massive, but enough to raise eyebrows if anyone were looking closely. "And is anyone looking closely?" I asked. Richard smiled thinly. "They will be, if certain documentation happens to find its way to the senior partners." The pieces were falling into place. But I needed one more element to complete my plan. Leverage over Vanessa. Because while she was helpful now, motivated by guilt and anger at Daniel, I needed insurance that she wouldn't waver when things intensified. That leverage came in the form of James, Vanessa's ex-boyfriend, who still harbored deep feelings for her. She broke up with me out of nowhere 6 months ago. He told me when I reached out to him. Said she needed space, but I always felt there was someone else. There was, I confirmed. My husband. His face darkened. "That explains a lot. I need your help, James. And I think you might want to be involved in what happens next." He leaned forward. "I'm listening." By the time Daniel and I were packing for our weekend at the cabin, every element of my plan was in position. The stage was set. All the players knew their roles, except Daniel, the unwitting star of the show I was directing. "I think this weekend is exactly what we need," he said, zipping his suitcase closed. "A chance to remember why we fell in love in the first place." I smiled, thinking of all the things he didn't know. I couldn't agree more. The cabin in Maine had been my sanctuary. Since childhood, my parents had built it themselves, a labor of love that took 3 summers to complete. After their deaths, it had become my refuge, the place I went to heal, to remember, to find peace. Daniel had never quite appreciated its rustic charm. He preferred luxury hotels with room service and spa treatments, but he had agreed enthusiastically to this trip, seeing it as an opportunity to win back my trust in a secluded setting. "It's even more beautiful than I remembered," he said as we pulled up the gravel driveway. The afternoon sun filtered through the pine trees, casting dappled shadows across the wooden porch and red door. I felt a pang of nostalgia mixed with resolve. My father installed that door the summer I turned 12. I held the ladder while he worked. Daniel squeezed my hand. I love hearing these stories. I feel like I'm seeing a side of you I'd forgotten, or never bothered to know. I've been preparing to show you a side of me you never bothered to know, I thought, but didn't say. We settled in for what Daniel believed would be a weekend of reconciliation. He built a fire in the stone hearth while I prepared dinner, his favorite pasta dish with the expensive wine he brought for the occasion. 2 new beginnings, he toasted, raising his glass. I clinked mine against his. To truth, if he noticed the discrepancy, he didn't show it. We ate by candlelight, Daniel reminiscing about our early days together, carefully avoiding any mention of recent events. After dinner, he suggested a walk along the lakeshore. It's been too long since we really talked, he said, wrapping an arm around my waist as we strolled under the stars. I miss us, Alina, the way we used to be. Which way was that? I asked. The way where I trusted you completely. Where I believed every word you said. He stopped walking. I know I've broken that trust, but I'm committed to earning it back, no matter how long it takes. I turned to face him, the moonlight illuminating his features. He looked sincere. He always did. Daniel had a gift for believing his own lies and the moment he told them. What about Costa Rica? I asked quietly. His expression didn't change, but I felt his body tense. What about it? The villa. The one you purchased through a shell company. That you planned to escape to with Vanessa. Now his face changed. Surprise, followed quickly by calculation. Alina, I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? I took a step back. I've seen the paperwork, Daniel. I've spoken to the agent who handled the sale. Jorge Mendez, remember him? Daniel's mask slipped for just a moment before he recovered. That was an investment property. A business opportunity I was exploring with my cousin. Because her name is on the paperwork, too. This visibly startled him. Vanessa's name wasn't actually on any documents that had been a guess, a fishing expedition that had just yielded results. It's complicated, he began. No, it's quite simple. I turned and started walking back toward the cabin. You've been planning your exit for months. The only thing that's changed is your timetable. He hurried after me. Alina, wait. It's not what you think. Yes, I bought the property, but it was a mistake. Part of a life I thought I wanted, but don't anymore. I've been trying to sell it. I stopped and faced him again. Are you sure about that? Because you had a call with the property manager just yesterday, discussing the new furniture delivery next month. His face went pale. How do you, I know, I finished for him. I know everything, Daniel, about the villa. About the money you're still moving offshore. About your meetings with Vanessa that never actually stopped. She told you? She showed me. I corrected. The texts, the emails, the recordings of your conversations where you promised her you were just stringing me along until the time was right. This was another calculated guess, but judging by his expression, it hit close enough to the truth. Daniel's demeanor changed completely. The contrite husband act evaporated, replaced by cold anger. You had no right to go through my private communications. And you had no right to steal our marital assets and plan a new life with my cousin behind my back. Yet here we are. We stood there in silence, the pretense between us finally stripped away. What do you want? He asked eventually. Money. The house. Is this a negotiation? I laughed softly. This isn't a negotiation, Daniel. It's a reckoning. I walked back to the cabin, leaving him standing alone by the lake. Inside, I sent a single text to Melissa. It's time. Within minutes, headlights appeared on the gravel driveway. Daniel stormed in just as car doors slammed outside. What the hell is this? He demanded. Who's here? I sat calmly on the sofa. Our weekend guests. The front door opened, revealing Vanessa, looking nervous but determined. Behind her stood Thomas, my brother-in-law and attorney. And beside him, to Daniel's visible shock, was Marshall, his oldest friend and accomplice in his financial maneuvers. What's going on? Daniel's voice had an edge of panic now. Marshall, what are you doing here? Marshall couldn't meet his eyes. I'm sorry, Daniel, but I can't be part of this anymore. Thomas stepped forward, extending a manila envelope. Daniel, Mercer, these are divorce papers, citing financial fraud, emotional abuse, and adultery. I suggest you read them carefully before deciding your next move. Daniel turned to me, his face a mixture of rage and disbelief. You planned this. All of it. The reconciliation, this trip. It was all a setup. I stood up slowly. Not all of it. I genuinely wanted to see if there was anything left worth saving, but you never stopped lying. Not even for a day. I gestured to the witnesses gathered in the small cabin. And now, everyone knows it. The confrontation at the cabin marked the beginning of Daniel's downfall, but not in the way anyone, even I, had anticipated. He'd read the divorce papers that night, his face growing darker with each page. When he finished, he looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something beyond anger, beyond hatred, something almost feral. "You think you've won," he said quietly. "But you have no idea what I'm capable of." It should have frightened me, but instead, it confirmed what I already knew. The man I had married was gone, if he had ever existed at all. "Neither do you," I replied. The weekend ended with Daniel leaving abruptly, taking his suitcase and the divorce papers. Thomas advised me to stay at the cabin a few more days with Vanessa and Melissa for support, giving Daniel time to cool down. "He'll consult with his own attorney," Thomas warned. "They'll try to contest the evidence of financial misconduct. Be prepared." I nodded, but inside, I felt oddly calm, because Daniel still didn't know the full extent of what I'd discovered, or what I'd done. 3 days later, I returned to our house, to find it very empty. Daniel had cleared out his clothes, his personal items, even the photographs of us together from the walls. It looked like the home of a ghost. Melissa helped me change the locks while Sophia swept the house for hidden cameras or recording devices, precaution that proved warranted when she discovered a small mic in the bedroom lamp and another in the kitchen smoke detector. Gathering evidence for his side, Sophia explained, disabling the devices. "He's trying to catch you saying something he can use against you." The following weeks unfolded like a complex chess match. Daniel hired Bradley Wilson, a notorious divorce attorney known for his aggressive tactics. I received notice that Daniel was contesting all my claims in countersuing for his share of the cabin property, Thomas told me. "He's trying to hurt you where it matters most. The cabin has sentimental value. He knows that, but Daniel's strategy relied on 2 critical assumptions: that I was operating alone, and that he still controlled most of our financial resources. Both assumptions were wrong. The first blow came from an unexpected direction. Marshall, racked with guilt over his role in Daniel's financial schemes, went to the senior partners at the firm with documentation of irregular billing practices and misappropriated client funds. Daniel was called into an emergency meeting on a Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, his key card had been deactivated. His office was being packed up by HR, and an internal investigation had been launched. He called me that night, his voice slurred with alcohol. "You did this," he accused. "You turned Marshall against me." "Marshall made his own choices," I replied calmly. "Just like you did." The next blow came from Vanessa. Despite Daniel's continued attempts to contact her, alternating between threats and pleas for reconciliation, she had remained firmly on my side. When his attorneys approached her to testify against me in the divorce proceedings, she instead provided a signed affidavit, detailing their affair and his plans to leave the country with misappropriated marital assets. But the decisive strike came from Richard, Daniel's colleague and longtime rival. Using his position on the firm's finance committee, he had quietly conducted his own review of Daniel's client accounts, including several high-worth individuals Daniel had brought to the firm. "We found irregularities in the Westmore Foundation endowment management," Richard informed me during one of our clandestine meetings. "Significant enough that the firm has alerted the State Bar Association and frozen all accounts Daniel had access to." Within a month of our weekend at the cabin, Daniel's professional reputation was in tatters. His legal options were dwindling, and his financial safety nets were disintegrating, one by one. Then came the anonymous tip to the IRS about unreported foreign income, something I hadn't orchestrated, but suspected might have been Richard's additional contribution to Daniel's downfall. The divorce proceedings, which Daniel had clearly expected to drag out 4 years of costly litigation, instead moved with surprising speed. As his position weakened daily, his attorney, Bradley Wilson, sensing a no-win scenario and concerned about his own reputation, began pushing for settlement. "Toxie's running out of money," Thomas told me after a preliminary hearing. "The firm is suing him for damages. The IRS has frozen his personal accounts pending investigation, and the Costa Rica property. Turns out the shell company ownership structure violated several international banking regulations." I nodded, and Vanessa. "She's been subpoenaed by the firm for their internal investigation." Daniel tried to claim she was the mastermind behind the financial irregularities, but given her complete lack of access to the relevant accounts and systems, No one believed him. I finished. Thomas smiled grimly. His credibility is shot. At this point, he's just trying to salvage whatever he can. What Daniel couldn't know was that I had already achieved my primary objective, securing my future independence. The money he thought he'd hidden had largely been recovered and placed in trust accounts he couldn't touch. The cabin remained solely in my name, protected by ironclad documentation my parents had established years ago. More importantly, I had reclaimed something he had systematically stripped away during our marriage: my sense of agency, my confidence in my own judgment, my voice. The final confrontation came not in a courtroom, but in a mediation room at Thomas's law firm. Daniel looked like a shadow of himself, unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, his once immaculate suit slightly rumpled. "Before we begin," Thomas said, "my client has a proposal that might expedite these proceedings." Daniel snorted. "Let me guess, she wants everything." I leaned forward. "Actually, I'm prepared to be quite generous. You can keep the house, the cars, the vacation timeshare in Aspen. I'll even drop my claims to alimony." His eyes narrowed with suspicion. "In exchange for what?" "A full confession," I said simply. "In writing, notarized, detailing every aspect of your financial misconduct, your affair with Vanessa, and your plans to leave the country with misappropriated funds." "Why would I ever agree to that?" He scoffed. "It would be professional suicide." "Your career is already over, Daniel," I said quietly. "The only question now is whether you face potential criminal charges as well." His attorney whispered urgently in his ear, but Daniel waved him off. "This is absurd. You're bluffing." I opened my portfolio and slid several documents across the table: bank statements showing irregular transfers, emails between Daniel and Marshall discussing offshore accounts, and, most damaging, a forensic accounting report identifying specific client funds that had been temporarily diverted. "The firm already has copies of everything," I said, "as does the State Bar Association. This is your one opportunity to get ahead of the narrative." Daniel stared at the evidence, his face draining of color. "You've been planning this for months." "I learned from the best," I replied. "You taught me the value of careful preparation, of covering all contingencies, of having a backup plan." In the end, Daniel signed everything: the confession, the divorce settlement, the non-disclosure agreement, not out of remorse or a sense of justice, but because it was his least terrible option. As he stood to leave the mediation room, he paused beside my chair. "You destroyed everything I built," he said, his voice low and cold. I looked up at him calmly. "No, Daniel, you did that yourself. I just made sure you couldn't take me down. With you, fall gave way to winter, and the divorce was finalized with remarkably little fanfare." The legal notice appeared in the local paper. A small paragraph announcing the dissolution of marriage between Alina and Daniel Mercer, sandwiched between real estate listings and obituaries, an appropriate placement, I thought, for the death of a relationship built on lies. Daniel left town shortly after, reportedly headed for Arizona where his brother lived. The scandal at his firm had made local news but soon faded from public memory, replaced by newer, more sensational stories. People have short attention spans. For others, tragedy, something I found both comforting and unsettling. I sold the house, Daniel's dream home with its pretentious columns and marble countertops, and moved into a smaller place closer to downtown. The money from the sale, combined with what I'd managed to recover from our joint accounts, gave me a fresh start financially. Not wealth, but security. Freedom. Vanessa and I maintained a cautious distance. The betrayal was too profound for immediate forgiveness, but the shared experience of Daniel's manipulation had created an unexpected bond. We exchanged occasional texts, superficial at first, then gradually more meaningful. "Do you ever miss him?" she asked during a rare phone call 6 months after everything had imploded. "Not him," I replied after considering. "But sometimes I miss who I thought he was. Who I thought we were together." She was silent for a moment. "I'm seeing someone," she finally said. "James, actually. My ex from before everything." "I know," I said. "He told me." Another silence. "Are you okay with that?" The question surprised me. Was I okay with it? James had been instrumental in my plan, agreeing to reconnect with Vanessa when I suggested it, knowing full well the role she had played in my marriage's destruction. I had calculated that his lingering feelings for her would make him an eager participant. What I hadn't calculated was that those feelings might reignite on both sides. "I want you to be happy," I said eventually, Both of you. Life's too short for anything else. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly, but it was a step toward something new. A relationship defined by honesty rather than shared history. My own healing came in unexpected forms. I returned to photography, a passion Daniel had discouraged over the years. It's just an expensive hobby, Alina. Be practical. I joined a community darkroom, spending hours in the red-lit space, watching images emerge from blank paper, a metaphor that wasn't lost on me. I also started therapy with Dr. Winters, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who saw through my carefully constructed composure in our first session. You orchestrated an impressive takedown, she observed, peering at me over reading glasses. But at what cost to yourself? It was a question I'd avoided asking. The months of planning, of pretending, of calculated moves and countermoves, they had taken a toll. I had become someone I didn't fully recognize, harder, more suspicious, always looking for the trap, the lie, the betrayal lurking beneath the surface. I did what I had to do, I told her. Did you? She asked simply. Or did you do far more than was necessary because the pain demanded it? That question lingered as spring arrived, bringing with it the first anniversary of my ill-fated birthday party. Melissa suggested a rebirth celebration to replace the painful memory. Nothing fancy, she insisted. Just a few friends, good food, no candles or presents allowed. I agreed reluctantly, more for her sake than mine. The gathering was small: Melissa and her new boyfriend, my brother Thomas and his wife, a few colleagues from the hospital where I'd returned to work part-time in the radiology department, and, to my surprise, Sophia, the private investigator who had become an unexpected friend. I don't usually stay in touch with clients, she admitted, handing me a bottle of expensive scotch. But you're not the usual client. The evening was pleasant, the conversation flowing easily among people connected more to my present than my past. As midnight approached, Melissa raised her glass. To Alina, she said, who taught us all that the best revenge isn't just surviving, it's thriving. Everyone cheered, but I felt a strange, hollow feeling beneath my smile. Was I thriving? Or was I still defining myself by what had happened, by what had been done to me and what I had done in return? After the guests left, I sat alone on my balcony, watching the city lights and sipping Sophia's scotch. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I heard it was your birthday. I hope this one was better than the last. I'm sorry for my part in making that one so painful. I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. Before I could decide, another text arrived. James proposed. I said yes. I wanted you to hear it from me first. The news should have stirred something: resentment, perhaps, or bitterness, that Vanessa was finding happiness while I was still picking up the pieces. Instead, I felt an unexpected sense of closure. The tangled web that had connected us, Daniel, Vanessa, me, was finally unraveling, the threads separating into distinct lives. Congratulations, I wrote back. I wish you both happiness. I meant it, I realized. Not because I had forgiven completely, but because holding on to anger would only keep me tethered to the past. As spring turned to summer, I received periodic updates about Daniel through Thomas, who heard things through legal channels. The investigation into his financial dealings had expanded, revealing a pattern of misconduct dating back years. He had been formally disbarred. His brother had asked him to leave after discovering cash missing from his home office. He's running out of bridges to burn, Thomas told me over lunch. Word is he's headed to Florida now, to some cousin twice removed, who doesn't know his history. I nodded, surprised by my own lack of interest. Daniel's continuing downward spiral no longer felt like vindication. It was just sad life unraveling thread by thread. Are you still seeing that architect? Thomas asked, changing the subject. What was his name? Michael. No, I said. It didn't work out. What I didn't say was that I had ended things when I realized I was unconsciously testing Michael, setting small traps to see if he would lie, creating situations that might reveal hidden agendas. It wasn't fair to him, and it showed me I wasn't ready. Not yet. There's no timeline for healing, Dr. Winters had assured me, especially from betrayal trauma. The brain perceives it as a survival threat. It changes how we see the world, how we process trust. I was learning to be patient with myself, to recognize the hypervigilance and consciously relax it. To accept that vulnerability wasn't weakness, but courage. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon in July, just over a year since the confrontation at the cabin. I was in the darkroom, developing prints from a weekend hike, when my phone lit up with Vanessa's name. "Alina," she said, her voice tight with tension. "He's back." I didn't need to ask who. Back where? Here in town. James saw him at the supermarket yesterday. He looked rough, like he's been living hard. My stomach tightened. Did he see James? Yes, he approached him, asked, "About me? About you?" I closed my eyes, focusing on my breathing. What did James tell him? Nothing specific. Said we were engaged, that you were doing well, that he should leave us all alone. Vanessa hesitated. He laughed. Said something about unfinished business. James thought he seemed unhinged. After hanging up, I called Sophia immediately. "I need to know where he's staying," I said without preamble. "And what he's doing here." She didn't ask questions. "I'll find out. In the meantime, maybe stay with someone. Just as a precaution." I declined the suggestion, but I did accept Sophia's offer to install a security system at my apartment. By evening, I had cameras at my front door and balcony, motion sensors on all windows, and an app that would alert me to any unusual activity. Daniel made his first move 3 days later. A bouquet of lilies, my favorite flower, delivered to my door with a card that read simply, "We need to talk. D." I photographed the card and flowers, then threw them away. Sophia called an hour later. "He's staying at the Westview Motel," she reported. "Checked in 5 days ago under his own name. No car registered. He's been taking the bus or walking everywhere." "Any sign of what he wants?" "He visited his old firm yesterday. Security wouldn't let him in. He made quite a scene, apparently." She paused. "Alina, I don't want to alarm you, but my contact at the motel says he's been drinking heavily. The room is a mess. Lots of empty bottles." I thanked her for the information, trying to ignore the chill that ran through me. Daniel had always been a controlled drinker, 2 glasses of wine with dinner, maybe a scotch afterward, never to excess, never losing control. The next day, a Thursday, he appeared outside the hospital as I was leaving work. He looked thinner, his once meticulously groomed appearance, now shabby. His eyes, though they were the same intent, calculating, watching me as I approached. "Alina," he said, stepping forward. "You look well." I stopped several feet away. "What do you want, Daniel?" "Just to talk. To clear the air." He gestured vaguely toward a nearby coffee shop. 5 minutes. Every instinct warned against it, but curiosity won out. What could he possibly have to say after everything that had happened? The coffee shop was busy, good witnesses, and we took a table near the window. Daniel ordered a black coffee. I asked for water. "You've done well for yourself," he began. "New job, new place. I drove by your apartment. Nice building." The implied threat wasn't subtle. I met his gaze steadily. "If this is an attempt at intimidation, you should know there are cameras all over my building, and people who know exactly where I am right now and who I'm with." He smiled thinly. "Always 3 steps ahead. That's what I underestimated about you, Alina. I never saw you coming." He leaned forward. "I lost everything because of you." "You lost everything because of you," I corrected. "I just made sure I wasn't collateral damage." His smile faded. "Do you know where I've been this past year? What it's been like?" "Florida, most recently," I said. "After Arizona didn't work out when you stole from your brother." This visibly rattled him. "You've been keeping tabs." "Just staying informed." "Now, what do you want?" "The 5 minutes you asked for are almost up." Daniel stared into his coffee. "I want what's mine." "What you took from me." "I didn't take anything that wasn't legally mine in the divorce." "You signed the papers." "Under duress," he snapped. "With a gun to my head. Professionally, you had legal representation. You made your choice." He leaned in, his voice dropping. "I want the money from the Costa Rica property." "I know you found it. That account was mine, not joint marital property." So that was it. He had discovered that I'd located and emptied the offshore account holding the proceeds from the hurried sale of the villa, nearly $200,000 that he'd hidden during our marriage. "That money went to reimburse what you stole from our retirement accounts," I said calmly, "which were marital property. You came out ahead in that exchange." His face darkened. "I need that money, Alina. I'm not asking anymore. Are you threatening me?" "I'm telling you what happens next if I don't get what I need." He stood up. "You have 3 days. I'll be in touch about where to transfer the funds." I watched him leave, noting the slight unsteadiness in his walk, the tension in his shoulders. This wasn't the calculated Daniel I'd known. This was someone desperate, unpredictable. The security alert came at 2:17 a.m. Motion detected at my balcony door. I was awake instantly, grabbing my phone to check the camera feed. A dark figure was working at the lock, face obscured by a hoodie. I called 911, then Sophia, then retreated to the bathroom and locked the door. The balcony camera showed the figure still working at the door runs successfully, thanks to the reinforced lock Sophia had installed then. Abruptly, the figure turned and looked directly at the camera. Even in the dim light, Daniel's face was unmistakable. He smiled a cold, knowing expression, then calmly walked to the railing and climbed over it to the fire escape. By the time police arrived, he was gone. "We'll file a report," the officer said, looking bored, but without physical evidence of attempted entry. "I have the video," I insisted, showing him my phone. He glanced at it indifferently. "Could be anyone. Face isn't clear. And technically, he didn't break in." I spent the rest of the night at Melissa's apartment, lying awake on her sofa bed, replaying the image of Daniel's smile into the camera. It wasn't the action of a desperate man. It was calculated, meant to send a message. I can reach you whenever I want. The next morning, after a few hours of fitful sleep, I made two decisions. First, I would not give Daniel money. Second, I would not be driven from my home or terrorized into submission. Sophia arrived at Melissa's apartment with coffee and a determined expression. "I've got a friend installing additional security at your place right now," she said. "And I've been doing some digging. Your ex-husband's in worse shape than we thought." She pulled out her tablet and showed me what she'd found. Police reports from Florida showing multiple arrests for public intoxication, disorderly conduct, and one assault charge that had been dropped when the victim, a bartender, decided not to press charges. "He's spiraling," Sophia continued, "and based on what my motel contact says, he's barely eating, drinking constantly, and talking to himself. He seemed coherent yesterday," I said. "Focused. Functional. Functional alcoholics can pull it together when they need to. Doesn't mean he's stable." She hesitated. "Alina, I think you should consider a restraining order." I shook my head. "It would just antagonize him further. And it's just a piece of paper. It won't stop him if he's determined." "Then what's your plan?" I considered the question carefully. Daniel wanted money. Money I had no intention of giving him. But confrontation clearly wouldn't work. Neither would hiding. "I need to redirect him," I said slowly. "Give him a different target." Sophia raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." By that evening, a new strategy was in motion. Thomas filed an emergency motion with the court, claiming Daniel was in violation of the non-disclosure agreement he'd signed during our divorce, violation that carried substantial financial penalties. A process server delivered the papers to Daniel's motel room, along with a formal letter from Thomas's firm warning of imminent legal action. Meanwhile, Richard, Daniel's old rival at the firm, leaked information to Daniel through a mutual acquaintance. The firm's insurance was covering the client losses from Daniel's misconduct, but they were pursuing civil action against him personally to recover the funds. The goal was simple: keep Daniel focused on these new legal threats, distract him from his fixation on me, and, hopefully, push him to leave town again. For 2 days, the strategy seemed to work. Daniel was seen meeting with a local attorney, spending hours at the law library, and making frantic phone calls from the motel lobby. The security cameras at my apartment showed no further attempts to enter. Then, on the third day, the deadline Daniel had given me, everything changed. I was at work, finishing up with a patient, when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You think you're so clever, but I know where to hit you where it hurts." Minutes later, an emergency call came through from the caretaker at the main cabin. There had been a break-in, significant damage, and a small fire that had been contained before it could spread. "The living room's a mess," the caretaker reported. "Windows broken, furniture slashed, and someone spray-painted messages on the walls." "What messages?" I asked, my voice hollow. There was a pause. "Not fit to repeat, ma'am. But they mention you by name. Police are here now, taking photos." I left work immediately, called Thomas from the car, and drove straight to Sophia's office. By the time I arrived, she already had preliminary information from her contacts in Maine law enforcement. They found empty liquor bottles, cigarette butts. "Looks like he drove up yesterday, broke in, did the damage, tried to start a fire but it didn't catch properly, then left." She showed me photos on her tablet. my beloved cabin defaced, my parents' handcrafted furniture destroyed. On one wall, in red spray paint, "You took everything from me. Now we're even." They put out a bolo for him, Sophia continued, but no sign of him yet. He could be anywhere between here and Maine. I stared at the images, something cold and hard forming in my chest. The cabin had been my sanctuary, my connection to my parents, the one place that had always felt purely mine. And Daniel had known exactly what it meant to me. "He won't stop," I said quietly. This was just the beginning. Sophia nodded grimly. "I think you're right. So what do we do now?" I looked up from the tablet. "We end this. Once and for all." The plan came together quickly, a trap built from Daniel's own predictability and his desperate need for vindication. Thomas filed the restraining order we'd previously dismissed, ensuring it would be served at the motel. I gave an interview to a local reporter, an acquaintance of Melissa's, about the break-in at the family cabin, describing it as a devastating violation. The story ran online with a quote from me: "Some things can't be replaced." The memories in that cabin were all I had left of my parents. Then I waited, staying with Sophia instead of returning to my apartment. Daniel had destroyed what mattered most to me. Now he would want to see the impact, to witness my pain firsthand. Sure enough, the security alerts began the next evening. First at my apartment, Daniel testing the new security system, circling the building but not attempting entry. Then, at the hospital parking lot, where my car was conspicuously parked for my shift. Sophia's contacts in local law enforcement kept us updated on his movements without making any moves to apprehend him. Part of our agreement: "He's working himself up to something," Sophia observed as we watched the security feeds on her laptop. "Looking for an opportunity. He'll find one tomorrow," I said. "I've made sure of it." The local paper had run a small notice about a memorial gathering at Riverside Park, a tree planting in honor of my parents, organized by friends and family on the anniversary of their accident. It wasn't real, of course, but Daniel wouldn't know that. He would only see an opportunity, me, emotionally vulnerable in a public yet secluded setting. The park was quiet at 10 a.m. when I arrived, dressed in simple black, carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers. I chose a bench near the water, partially obscured by willow trees, visible from only certain angles, perfect for someone watching from a distance. I sat alone, placed the flowers beside me, and pretended to wipe away tears. In reality, I was speaking quietly into the microphone hidden in my scarf, confirming my position to the others. Sophia, stationed in a park maintenance vehicle 50 yards away. Detective Ramirez, an old colleague of Sophia's who had agreed to help unofficially. And James, Vanessa's fiancé, a former military police officer who had volunteered when he heard the plan. "Northeast entrance clear." Sophia's voice came through my hidden earpiece. "No sign yet." I nodded slightly, continuing my performance of grief. Minutes ticked by. A jogger passed, an elderly couple walked their dog along the river path. The sun climbed higher. Movement at the west parking lot, James reported suddenly. "It's him. Gray hoodie, sunglasses. He's scanning the area." My heart rate increased, but I kept my posture slumped, defeated, vulnerable. "He's spotted you," Sophia confirmed. "Moving your direction along the tree line, staying partially concealed." I dabbed at my eyes with a tissue, then reached into my bag, as if searching for something. The small digital recorder was exactly where I'd placed it, set to capture every word. 20 yards and closing, Detective Ramirez murmured in my ear. "Remember, we need clear intent. Let him make the first move." I nodded imperceptibly, keeping my gaze fixed on the water. Footsteps approached from behind, deliberate, unhurried. Then, a familiar voice with an unfamiliar edge. "Touching tribute," Daniel said, moving into view. "Your parents would be moved. Almost as moved as I was when I saw what was left of their precious cabin." I looked up, feigning surprise and fear. "Daniel, you shouldn't be here. There's a restraining order." "A piece of paper," he scoffed, sitting beside me uninvited. Up close, he looked even worse than before, unshaven, eyes bloodshot, a slight tremor in his hands. But his voice was steady, his gaze focused. "We have unfinished business." "Have nothing to say to you," I replied, starting to stand. "And nothing to give you." His hand shot out, gripping my wrist with surprising strength. "Sit down, Alina. I'm not asking." I complied, my pulse racing. In my ear, Sophia whispered, "That's assault. We can move now." I gave the slightest headshake. "Not yet. We needed more." The cabin was just a warning. Daniel continued, his grip still tight on my wrist. I can take a lot more from you. Your reputation, your career. His voice dropped lower. Your sense of safety. How does it feel knowing I can reach you whenever I want? What do you want from me? I asked, my voice deliberately shaky. I told you. The money, all of it. And a signed statement that the evidence you presented during our divorce was falsified. I frowned in confusion. Why would you want that? Because I'm rebuilding, he snarled. And I don't need the record showing I committed financial crimes. So that was his endgame, not just money, but a clean slate. A chance to start over without the stain of his misdeeds. And if I refuse? His grip tightened painfully. Then I continue what I started at the cabin. Only next time, I make sure the fire catches properly. He leaned closer. Or maybe I focus on something more immediate. Someone more immediate. That friend of yours, ... Melissa. She lives alone, right? Limited security in that building. A chill ran through me. This wasn't just desperation. This was something darker. Daniel had crossed a line from which there was no return. You're threatening to hurt my friend. To commit arson. I clarified, making sure the recorder captured every word. I'm promising consequences, he corrected. You destroyed my life. Why should you get to walk away unscathed? Why should anyone around you? In my ear, Detective Ramirez's voice was urgent. We've got enough. Clear intent to commit felony crimes. Give the signal when ready. I met Daniel's gaze directly. You want to know why I get to walk away? Because I'm not the one who built a life on lies. I'm not the one who betrayed every principle of decency for my own gain. You did that to yourself, Daniel. And you're still doing it. His expression contorted with rage. You think you're so much better than me. You planned and calculated and manipulated just like I did. We're the same. No, I said quietly. We're not. Because I know when to stop. I raised my free hand and tucked my hair behind my ear, the signal. Everything happened at once. Detective Ramirez emerged from behind a nearby tree. James approached rapidly from the left. Sophia's maintenance vehicle rolled forward on the path. Daniel's face registered shock, then understanding, then a kind of desperate fury. He released my wrist and lunged to his feet, looking wildly for an escape route. Daniel Mercer, Detective Ramirez announced formally. You're under arrest for violation of a protective order, assault, making criminal threats, and breaking and entering. You have the right to remain silent. Daniel's shoulders slumped as the detective continued reading his rights. He didn't resist as his hands were cuffed behind his back, but as they led him toward the park entrance, he turned back to look at me one last time. It was worth it, he called out. Everything I did. Because for a while, I had everything, including, you remember that. I watched them load him into an unmarked police car, feeling not triumph, but a profound exhaustion, as if I'd been carrying a weight for miles and could finally set it down. Sophia approached, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. You okay? I nodded slowly. It's over. But we both knew it wasn't that simple. There would be a trial, testimony, the cabin to rebuild, the emotional aftermath to process. Yet something had shifted, a chapter closing, a new one beginning. Daniel's parting words, intended to wound, had instead clarified something I'd been struggling to articulate even to myself. For years, I had defined my worth through his eyes, believing that being chosen by him somehow validated me. Now, I understood the fundamental lie in that thinking. My value had never depended on his selection or approval. It had always been intrinsic, something he had recognized and tried to possess, but could never actually touch or diminish. As we walked away from the park, I felt lighter than I had in months. Not because justice had been served or because revenge had been exacted, but because I had finally, truly let go of the person I had been in Daniel's shadow. The woman who had caught her husband with her cousin in the bathroom on her birthday was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, wiser, and wholly her own. 2 years later, I stood on the new porch of the rebuilt cabin, watching the sunrise over the lake. The reconstruction had taken longer than expected, partly due to supply chain issues, partly because I had insisted on certain elements being exactly as my parents had designed them, and partly because I had taken my time, ensuring each decision was truly mine. Behind me, the cabin door opened. Coffee delivery, called a familiar voice. I turned to see Michael Knott, the architect I had briefly dated after my divorce. But Michael Goodwin, a literature professor I had met through a photography class. He was carrying 2 steaming mugs and wearing the slightly rumpled look of someone still adjusting to morning. Perfect timing, I said, accepting the mug gratefully. The light is just hitting the water. He joined me at the railing, his free arm slipping comfortably around my waist. It's beautiful here. I can see why it means so much to you. I leaned against him, taking in the view we had shared many times now over the course of our relationship. Michael knew my story, all of it, the betrayal, the revenge, the aftermath. He had never judged, never recoiled, never treated me as damaged goods. Instead, he had simply listened, understood, and then asked if I wanted to hear about the time his cat destroyed his only copy of his doctoral thesis. His normalcy, his quiet humor, his complete lack of agenda had been a balm after years of strategic relationships. With Michael, what you saw was what you got: a brilliant mind, a kind heart, an occasional tendency to quote obscure poetry when drunk. Any news? He asked carefully. He meant about Daniel, whose parole hearing was scheduled for the following month. The trial had revealed even more than I had known: additional women he had manipulated, financial schemes dating back to his first years at the firm, a pattern of calculated exploitation that had left a trail of damage in its wake. Thomas thinks they'll deny early release, I said. The psychological evaluation wasn't favorable. Michael nodded, not pressing further. He understood my complicated feelings about Daniel's incarceration, the relief mixed with lingering sadness for the waste of potential, the lives disrupted, the man he might have been in a different reality. And Vanessa? He asked, changing the subject. How was the baby shower? I smiled, thinking of my cousin, now 7 months pregnant and radiant with happiness. Our relationship had slowly healed over time, not to what it had been, but to something new and perhaps more honest. They're naming her Lily. I took a sip of coffee. James asked me to be godmother. Michael squeezed my waist gently. That's wonderful. You'll be amazing. We stood in comfortable silence, watching the mist rise off the lake. Inside the cabin, Melissa and her husband were still sleeping in the guest room, along with their 1-year-old son. We had planned a weekend of hiking, cooking, board games, normal things, joyful things, the kind of memories the cabin was meant to hold. I've been thinking, Michael said after a while, his voice taking on the slightly nervous quality that always made me smile, about the future, our future, specifically. I turned to face him, raising an eyebrow. Professor Goodwin, are you about to make a speech? Because you get very formal when you're working up to something important. He laughed, the tension breaking. Caught. Yes, I had something prepared, with appropriate literary references and possibly a sonnet. He set his coffee down on the railing. But looking at you now, in this place that means so much to you, I think I'll just ask straight out. He took both my hands in his. Alina, will you marry me? The question hung between us, simple and profound. 2 years ago, standing in the same spot after discovering my husband's betrayal, I couldn't have imagined this moment. This quiet happiness, this uncomplicated love, this sense of possibility. Yes, I said, squeezing his hands. But no big ceremony, no elaborate plans. Just us, this place, the people who matter most. His smile was like a sunrise breaking over the water. That sounds perfect. Later that day, as our friends celebrated the engagement with champagne on the dock, I slipped away briefly to the small memorial garden I had planted for my parents near the tree line. The wildflowers were in full bloom, a riot of color against the green backdrop. I think you would have liked him, I said softly, imagining my mother's knowing smile, my father's careful assessment. He's kind, honest, makes terrible pancakes, but tells great stories. A breeze rustled through the trees, sending dappled light dancing across the garden. I closed my eyes, feeling the warmth on my face, listening to the distant laughter from the dock. The cabin stood behind Mary-built, but different, stronger in some places, with new elements that honored the original vision while creating something unique, like me, like the life I was building, day by day, choice by choice. The path that had led here had been painful, filled with betrayal and darkness and hard-won wisdom. But standing in the garden my parents had loved, hearing the voices of people who truly cared for me, I knew with certainty, some endings are really beginnings in disguise, and some revenges aren't about destruction at all, but about reclaiming what was always rightfully yours, your power, your peace, your ability to trust again. Not in spite of what happened that night in the bathroom on my birthday, but because of it. I had found my way back to myself, And that was the most shocking outcome of all.